hour, but we want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. One thing I want to do ask, if you could please go ahead and take a moment and rename yourself to change your name. We're going to be doing breakout rooms in just a moment. You can see in the chat some instructions here. So you'll notice that my name, I put myself in the PI category. So I'm PI-Jesse Spencer-Smith. So if you could decide which of these categories you kind of fall in, and just prepend your name with one of those 4 categories, and we're going to be using that to put people into particular breakout rooms in just a moment. Would like, as you're doing that, would like to invite you to participate in some of our upcoming workshops as well. So you saw just a quick look at those just a moment ago. I'm going to go ahead and share the list that we're going to have. So one moment. Here we go. All right. So we have a series of workshops this entire couple of months, this entire semester. We're very related to this. It's going to be actually getting some practice running projects in GitHub to graphical user interface. Then after that, we're going to be talking about making GitHub work for teams. A machine learning introduction with some hands-on. And then we're going to get in. Oh, it looks like we. All right. I have. Apparently, I crashed for just a moment. So let me go ahead and get started back up again. Sharo, could you tell me where I dropped off?
You were talking about I believe the workshops coming up with GitHub.
So we have workshops coming up, and you are more than welcome to visit our webpage to see what we have coming up. And Sharo, if you could go ahead and let's see if I am host one more time. Okay, great. All right, let's go ahead and make sure that everyone has renamed themselves. A few folks still need to rename yourself. And then we're going to get started. We're going to be going to breakout rooms in just a few moments. All right, so I've had the privilege of participating in running data science projects from a number of different perspectives over the years. And one of the advantages that this has afforded me is I've had a lot of opportunities to fail in lots of different ways. So it turns out that running data science projects is actually, it can be a rather difficult thing to do. And some of the traditional things that we know and that we think we understand don't necessarily hold up all that well. So I've run research and analytics projects from the perspective of a researcher, a principal investigator as a faculty member. I've run them in business as the leader of a data science team, and now have this interesting position where we're running a number of different projects. The interesting thing that we're doing right now is that we're always spinning up new data science projects with brand new teams, brand new technical challenges. So the skills, the problems, the personalities The technology changes with every project that we stand up. So every project is nearly greenfield. So this is a series of natural experiments in how one might run data science projects. So our goal today is to share with you what we've learned. We'd also like to hear from each other about our current challenges. You'll hear about some industry standard approaches, and you'll see how we've adapted these to particular approaches to meet the particular needs of data science and of research. And finally, you'll be able to judge whether this approach that we're going to be talking about today addresses your pain points. If they do, we hope that you'll join us next week for more specifics on how to actually run these projects using GitHub. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is we're going to break out into breakout rooms. We'd like to do a couple of things here. So first, we're going to, today we're going to be talking about what's not working for you. We're going to do them in breakout rooms. Two, we're going to talk about traditional approaches to managing projects and what works and doesn't work. Then we're going to talk about a proposed approach, one that we use on a regular basis that we found is successful and that we have worked with other teams to set up and found success with them using this as well. And finally, at the very end, we're going to see how well we've addressed the pain points that we've discussed. So the breakout rooms are going to be arranged by peer group. So if you haven't already, be sure to change your display name so you can indicate whether you're a graduate postdoc, undergrad, you're a PI, or you're in business. When we go into the breakout rooms, we'll be opening those in just a moment. Please choose a reporter for your room. That's going to be one person who will be available to answer questions. I'm going to randomly choose a few rooms to call on to get a little bit more information and background on what you've answered for the two questions. The first question is, how do you usually run your research or analytics or data science projects currently? The second is, what doesn't work well? And what are the pain points with the approach that you currently have? And then I'm going to ask you to actually type these answers into our breakout room responses. So I'm going to go and share the link for that right now in chat. And so you can use this link right here. You can click on that and you can actually go in there and edit that file directly. I'd like to go ahead and open up the rooms now. So Among, if you could go ahead and open up the rooms. You're going to be invited in. We're going to be in the rooms for about 10 minutes. There'll be a countdown timer. You'll be in a group with your peers. Take just a few minutes to answer those two questions. Type in the answer into the proper place in the form. And then we'll come back and we'll share out how we are running projects right now and what our pain points are. Let's go and open up the rooms. And Umang, for the folks who came in a little bit later and aren't in rooms, just go ahead and feel free to assign them as best you can.
All right, on it.
And welcome everybody who joined us a little bit later. We're going to be assigning people into rooms now so you can go and talk about your current approaches, what works and what doesn't work.
Having a little trouble adding people to breakout rooms who aren't in them already. Just give me a second.
And I'll see if I can give you a hand with that. All right. And Iman, did you? Oh, and we have some folks in the waiting room. And Iman, did you set the timer for the room as well?
Yes, I did. So they should ideally close in 10 minutes.
Edward, hello. Were you able to get into a breakout room? And you're able to unmute yourself if you care to.
Yes, hello. I went into a room, but I was a little confused. I was with a group of grad students. I'm not sure if that's where you wanted me. I'm a PI.
Okay, great. We can put you in there.
Yeah,
Right. I'm gonna room 7, perhaps, Iman?
yeah, do that. Yeah.
Excellent. Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay. How much time do we have left for the breakout rooms?
Does it give me a counter anywhere?
It should be. I'm not seeing a counter, so I think that
Maybe it didn't set it.
maybe it didn't set it. So
Oh, I know. Yeah, because when you glitched out for a second, I think all the settings changed.
okay. Can you do we know how long you've been in there?
No, but I can start a timer and we can.
Let's give them 5 more minutes.
All right. Done.
Looks like room 1 is not. Let's set our own timer for 5 minutes and then we'll.
Yeah, I have that.
Okay. Go and send a message when you have. Okay, good. They're getting started. Okay. Let's give them 2 more minutes. Come on, and then maybe in 1 minute, if you can do a broadcast message to all.
All right.
Hmm. Okay.
All right, I'll send a message. 1 more minute.
Yeah. Edward, great. I'm glad we put him in the right room. Let's give him just another moment because room 2 is finally
Okay, yeah.
looking. Let him get one or two more thoughts down. That's it, 1 minute from now.
Okay.
Great. Yes. All right, I'd say it's about time.
All right, let me close them. Oh, they're gonna close in 60 seconds.
Welcome back. Still have a few folks appearing from the rooms. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you very much for taking some time and for sharing your thoughts. Let's go ahead and just take a look at some of these pain points, if we could, from different perspectives. Let's go ahead and start with a business perspective. So room 1, I'm curious about tracking the fluid nature of data science project. Who's your reporter for room 1, and can tell us a little bit more about that?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Clark. I've been deemed the reporter for room 1. Okay, so the discussion in our room was really centered around kind of what we're calling the fluid nature of data science projects, but how it's kind of iterative, right? We didn't go into specifics, but going through the feature engineering process and then model building and sort of hyperparameter tuning. That's all very difficult to track with some of the existing tools that we have. Bitbucket was mentioned, GitHub. Also, in my experience, I've used Jira before to track data science projects, and it just doesn't really seem to work well. It's hard to kind of capture and articulate distinct steps of a data science project in discrete tickets. And also it doesn't really capture kind of all of the missteps that happened along the way in terms of model building. So you don't really get like that accurate record of what was tried, what failed, and sort of be able to really have that reproducibility that I think that we all kind of crave, right?
Fantastic.
We also talked at length in our room about how it's difficult to explain to different segments of the business what is an accuracy, what is an AUC F1 score, why is it important to the business, and everyone's kind of working on a different definition of what accuracy means.
Yes.
Accuracy to a sales team might be very different mathematically than what an actual accuracy is calculated with like a confusion matrix, right?
Lindsay, you're perfect right there. Let me go and stop you there just if I could, because you've hit on two perfect things. And I want to make sure that we get back to those as well. You would think that there's so much dissimilarity between business and between research, but actually you've just nailed a couple of things that are just so germane and relevant to both. So the fluidity and the tracking and creating historical documents around all the discussion and what's happening at different steps, and then actually even defining, what is good and what the measures are and how to communicate that out. Perfect. Thank you so much. Room 2, you also talked a little bit about project management tools creating overhead. You're absolutely right. So Lindsay, you tried out Jira and a couple of other things, and probably each time it took extra effort to make these things work. Room 3, you mentioned a couple of these things, and also things like a backlog of workflow, lack of prioritization, very common problem. Let's go ahead and let's sort of flip to the PI side. Edward, we had you in the wrong room to begin with, but I'm so glad you got into the right room because you had some great suggestions here. So room 7, who's a reporter for room 7? And can talk a little bit about the no official structure and multiple participants with different training.
Okay, let me so I was in room 3, room 7. I guess because our consensus was that we are all academics, or at least the ones that spoke were academic PIs. And so what many of us talked about was the difficulty of integrating team members that have very different knowledge, and where there is often not exactly a clearly defined structure how projects should be developed in an academic setting.
Yes.
And that was like a key concern, I think, that many of us shared.
Perfect. That is great. Now let's go ahead and let's then go to the undergraduate, because they're the ones experiencing this as well, and then we'll return to the graduate students. So for undergraduates, let's see. Room 8, who's a reporter for room 8? What was some of the challenges that you had? And I see communicating, troubleshooting without a set protocol. Could you explain a little bit more, room 8? Room 8 might not have been able to select a reporter. That's all right. It's a common experience with undergraduates. They don't know what to do when things aren't going well. They're unsure sort of how to be onboarded, what background they need to have in order to actually participate, which is the flip side exactly of what you were just talking about, Marcus. All right, then let's go ahead and let's talk about some grad students. And if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to call on Lydia directly from room 6. Can you describe a little bit about what you said when a new task comes up? How do we assign tasks?
Hi. Sorry, give me a moment. I have to pull my shit up really quick. Here. So room 6, here we go. So we talk about that we use GitHub for running the projects, and one of our folks use emails for communication. And what don't work well is communicating by email could be hard sometimes, just by email, you know, it's too many moving pieces. And Moyo said that email flat files back and forth. When using GitHub, who is reviewing the code? Like we talk about the accountability issues, and then my part is, so talking about my experience from Nashville Software School, we do use GitHub a lot for managing the projects, and we normally assign the issues for each of us. But when it comes to really combine our part together, it could be hard because we might lost track about, you know, we are exploring in different part in the analysis, and who is holding accountable for each other when we put it together.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. So a lot of different pain points across different pain points across. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about the data science lifecycle and what makes this so difficult. So in the data science lifecycle, you generally have problem definition, you have data exploration, and then you have this cyclical exploration of this feature engineering and modeling and assessment and then deployment. But let's think about how that's different from, say, software development. In software development, it's fairly linear. It's fairly clear what's going to be coming next, that there's a set of tasks that need to be done. When in data science, you might define the problem, you might do some data exploration, and then you immediately know your answer, which is, no, this cannot be done. That would never happen in software development. The answer sometimes can be no. And sometimes the answer is, we need to go back and redefine your problem. We can't answer your initial problem, therefore we must answer a different problem. So there's always cycling back, not just within the feature engineering and modeling, sometimes they're cycling back all the way back to the very beginning of the problem definition. This makes things fundamentally different in data science and analytics and research than in most other types of endeavors. So let's go and take a look at some traditional approaches to managing projects that you can find in business and see how well they might work to solve some of these problems for us. The first one is Waterfall. With Waterfall, oh yes, and Chris, you're right, that was way too clean. There ought to be lots of arrows going back, but so with Waterfall, the idea is that you get your requirements, you decide beforehand. The nice thing about Waterfall, you can easily represent all the dependencies, but it is absolutely linear. And as we just discussed, research, data science, analytics is not linear. So almost immediately, Waterfall is water-fail because it simply doesn't capture everything that needs to happen. So what else do we have? Well, we have, let's see here. So we do have Agile. So I love this, the Agile development. This was a reaction to Waterfall and that type of project management. And the idea here was that you're going to have close collaboration between individuals and the stakeholders. You're going to emphasize working software. You're going to be collaborating with the people who are actually going to be using it, and you're always going to be responding to change. This is closer to what we want. What I love about this webpage, which is the manifesto, is the fact that it is almost it's almost like religious iconography, isn't it? And actually, often in Agile, it is treated as such. So you have 4 ceremonies that are important. You have sprint planning. So sprint is a collection of work. It could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, but this is the amount of time that you're going to be working. Every day during the sprint, you have a stand-up, a scrum. You don't sit down, you actually communicate and you answer a few questions. What I did yesterday, what I'm going to be doing in the future. You have retrospective demos and you have iterative review. So let's take a look at each one of these just real quickly. With sprint planning, you often have what's called a Kanban board. All the things that could be done, your backlog, what's going to be in progress, what's for the sprint this week or for this sprint. whether it's been reviewed and whether it's done and whether it's blocked. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that each of those little Post-it notes is actually what's called a story. And the idea for a story is that you describe what's supposed to be happening. There are tasks underneath each one of those user stories, and you have to give an estimate of how long it's going to take to do this thing. So you have to have an estimate of how long, and sometimes it's sized in different ways. You have to give an estimate, and actually turns out to be really important because a lot of the emphasis behind Agile is keeping track of the estimated effort and whether or not you actually got all that done. But in data science, as we just saw, the uncertainty is not whether we're getting the estimate of the particular work right, it's the entire process which gives you uncertainty. You don't know if you're going to need to actually go back and redo something. You don't know necessarily how difficult it is going to be to solve a particular problem. So this is where Agile begins to fall down. Kanban board, great. Sizing of user stories, not so great. There's the daily stand-up, which is, what did I complete yesterday? What will I work on today? Am I blocked by anything? This often will work well for business-based data science teams. You get together, you sort of share what's happening. In academia and research, it doesn't work. You simply don't talk every day. It tends to be much more asynchronous. And so actually getting together every day is not a workable solution. Retrospective demos, where you actually get together and show what you've done over the past sprint. This is great. This works really well in academia and in business. The idea is simply to share where you are, what's been happening. That's a great way to share other techniques and tools. And then iteration and review. This really doesn't work for data science. You have your estimate, your ideal of how much time you're going to be spending, how much time it actually took you to get these things done. There's so much uncertainty that has nothing to do with the people working on the project, but has everything to do with the project and the problems you're solving themselves, that it turns out that burn down charts really don't tend to work very well for data science at all. So what can we do to modify this to make this work a little bit better for us? Well, what we're going to propose here and what we use on a regular basis and use with multiple teams is a data science-centric approach. So we have to get rid of a few things. First of all, sprint planning needs to look different. In Agile, by the book, sprint planning is not done with very senior people in the room. With sprint planning, that's sort of the team, the scrum master, you all decide. But remember, in data science, you often have to go back to the very beginning. So that means you need to have the decision makers in the room. So in research, that means PIs need to be part of deciding and prioritizing what's going to be happening in a particular sprint. In business, that often means you either need to have an exec in the room or someone who's very knowledgeable and very plugged in and can speak authoritatively and say, okay, it's all right if you can't answer this question, or we're going to pivot a bit because the data, there's not enough signal, as has been expressed to me. Daily stand-up also doesn't quite work. We're going to replace that with continuous communication. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Asynchronously in academia, almost always. It's not great when this is email. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a system that allows for communication that's closely tied to the things that are being worked on, the issues that are being worked on. The other thing that we're going to add to our new DS Agile is paired group, making time for paired or group coding problem solving. So this is a set time during the sprint when multiple people get together to work together on the code base or to solve the problem together. Plan for this, put it in the schedule so people can actually solve problems together. It doesn't work to have people working completely independent all the time. Demos, still great, they work. And then instead of iteration review, where you say, you didn't get as much work done as you thought you were going to get done, instead, take that time at the end of the sprint to talk about model and analysis review. How well are things working? So Lindsay, you brought up the difficulty in actually assessing how well things are working. Well, it turns out that is a problem with defining the project at the very, very beginning. So, sprint planning, writing and prioritizing issues in GitHub. We'll see that in just one moment. Stakeholders participate. Stakeholders and even the PIs write issues in that repository. And we're going to be talking about that in just a moment. Continuous communication through issue comments. We're going to see what that looks like. Paired group coding, demos, and then model and analysis review. So how does a stakeholder, an executive, or a PI directly assess model performance? Well, before you even begin, especially in business, before you begin, you assess the possible value of the project and the data science project. So you come up with a metric that everyone is going to agree on. This project, this data science product is going to be used to help make decisions. What are the values of those decisions? What would be the contribution of this model if it were to work a particular level? Let's run simulations. Let's see what the monetary value is of this particular solution. Similarly, in research, you come up with what contribution this model or this data science product is going to make. Let's make a metric that we can all understand and live with. So rather than trying to report out and think about traditional machine learning metrics or deep learning metrics of AUC or even confusion matrices, you actually estimate the value of this on something that you've all agreed on beforehand. Then even an executive can say, so this model is now worth $200,000 a year. And you think if you work on this for another two weeks, you can make it $210,000 a year? Stop your work. $200,000 is good enough. The model performance is great. I don't care what the AUC is. I don't care what the model performance is. When we run the simulations, the model is worth this much. I can make a call on that. But one additional, actually, let's go and see what this looks like in practice, shall we? So let's see what it looks like to use GitHub to actually use to track this work in GitHub using an aspect of GitHub that you may not have seen before. And Dr. Bell, we're going to be doing IB archive, is that correct? Excellent. All right, so this is a repository. If you're unfamiliar with repositories, not a problem, join us for our workshop next week. So this is a repository which includes all of the code for a particular project. It has a description. Now, part of the problems that we've run into was undergraduates not knowing how to get started with projects. Well, the GitHub repository is the way to get people onboarded into a project. You're not too sure exactly what you're supposed to be doing next? Well, issues can describe exactly what needs to be done, information about how to solve it. As people are working this is where communication can happen. So rather than swapping emails back and forth or trying to communicate about how to solve particular problems, issues are where things are communicated. So how do you sort of bring this together so you can actually manage a project? Well, we can return to our Kanban board, our board of what's happening in the backlog, what's going to be happening in the current sprint, what's in progress, what needs to be reviewed, and what's done. So these are all the issues that we saw before. And we can actually prioritize these by moving these issues around. These are the equivalent of user stories or cards in traditional Agile. PIs, execs, product owners, this is work for you to do, for you to think about what needs to be done next, what's most important. And you actually assign to the particular person at this point when you pull this into the current sprint to be done. So at a glance, you can see who is working on what. So for example, this person is a particular person working on the project. Here are all the different cards that particular person has for this sprint. So this is the high level view of exactly what's happening. This is this is how we communicate about projects, and this is how you can tell what has priority, and what needs to be done. And keep in mind, lots of different things can be put in here. It doesn't just have to be tasks for a particular project. This can also be future ideas for research or for the project. Those can simply be prioritized here as well. This gives you that document that carries forward in time. So as you bring people onto the project, or as you actually think about where to go next with this, all of this is memorialized here. So let's go ahead and take a look at one additional tweak that we need to make to our at DS Agile to actually make this work. PIs, you know this, it's really tough to get on your schedule. Undergrads, grad students, postdocs, you know this, it's really hard to get on the PI's schedule. Business owners, you know it is very, very difficult to get the exec or to get someone who is very tied into the executive team into the room. So actually it doesn't work that well to request their presence both at sprint planning at the beginning of the sprint and also at the model analysis and review at the end of the sprint. So what we tend to do is we tend to bring those two together. So we do model analysis and sprint planning. This can be at the end of the sprint, where you sort of plan for the next sprint, or at the very beginning, immaterial. But at that meeting, you assess where the research is right now, what the model performance is right now, along the metric that you have decided on beforehand, where the research is, what needs to happen next. You assess at that point whether it's worthwhile to turn that crank one more time to do additional feature engineering, to do additional model fitting. You decide at that point whether that the juice is going to be worth the squeeze at that point. And then you can decide and prioritize and write those issues. And so the stakeholders participate in this. Assess, plan for the next sprint, all in one sitting. It makes for a longer meeting, an hour or for 90 minutes. But once you do that, you've knocked out both things. You've assessed where you are, and you've also planned on what's going to be happening next. Then what happens next? You have the continuous communication through the issues. You've assigned issues to people. People comment on the issues. You'll see next week you can actually @ other people. And so they get an email, they get a notification that they're being asked a question about a particular issue. Those issues are tied to the code that is written to solve the issues. So everything is tightly coupled. You have paired and group coding during that sprint. And finally, you have demos. So this is what the DS Agile Sprint looks like. It's important to have everyone on the same page. And by page, I mean literally the same page. Because you have PIs, you have execs, you have undergrads, grads, postdocs, everyone needs to be in the GitHub repository. Everyone needs to be looking at and contributing to the issues. Everyone needs to be looking at that project board. So that's why we make GitHub the centerpiece of all of this, and that's the subject of next week's workshop. So everyone literally needs to be on the same page and contributing right there. This doesn't solve everything. There's still weaknesses in DS Agile. So some of the problems are, you're probably not going to have a full-time Scrum Master or project manager. You know, and usually the role of that person is to communicate to the different stakeholders. So that's why I say everyone literally needs to be on the same page. If you don't have a full-time Scrum Master or project manager, everyone needs to be looking at that GitHub repo. And that means introducing people who've never used GitHub before, who don't code, introducing them to this so they can actually contribute to issues, answer questions, and see where the project is. That can be a hard thing to do. Dependencies are hard to represent here. You know, the cards are simply sitting there. They're not necessarily tied to each other. You can use milestones, and that ties things together so you can see the incremental progress on particular parts. Strict deadlines are hard to represent here. That's a problem with Agile as well, but milestones, again, help with those. We'll be talking about this next week. And finally, this is not going to give you the answer to how to assess models and analysis. You've got to do that beforehand by coming up with the metric beforehand. We'll have a workshop on that later on in the semester as well. But you need to come up with a commonly accepted metric of what success looks like for you before you even begin a project. Dr. Bell, there's certainly been projects that we have delayed for weeks because we couldn't come up with a metric before we could get started. And it's worthwhile to just say, if you can't measure the value of the work that we're going to be doing, you probably shouldn't do the work. So let's spend the time, let's figure out how to measure the values, scientific value, monetary value, and how to measure how well things are working before we get started. All right, let's see how we did. So Dr. Bell, I believe that you were taking a little bit of time to sort of gather our thoughts. And what I'd like to do is go ahead and see how well we've done. I'm in the document. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time. And you can help me check off responses. You all are going to have to tell me whether you think that what we've proposed so far addresses these. All right. Pain points. One thing was having the right tools. I'm going to ask for people to vote using the green check mark, if you would. So if you believe that this approach addresses the problem of having the right tools, give me a green check mark. Otherwise, give me the red check mark. And you should be able to see this under where it says responses. All right. So we have 6 yeses, 7 yeses, any no's? Okay, yep, that's fair. So 7 yeses. Go ahead and take a moment and vote. Let's go ahead and wait until we hear from 10 folks total. Go and vote again if you need to. They do disappear. So does what we talked about so far address having the right tools? All right. I'm going to go and give this to us. I myself am a little bit unsure. I think GitHub gives you a lot of the tools, may not be everything. Scope creep. Does this approach address scope creep? Go ahead and give the green check mark or the red X if you don't think so. This is about even. I'm going to give us a sort of an even there. It doesn't give it to you for free, right? You still have to decide, and that is actually a problem with Agile where people can keep on adding stories in. That's one of the excuse me. That is one of the benefits of doing sizing of stories and doing the burn down chart. You can say, hey, you can add that if you want to, but it's going to blow up our time. Here, there are no breaks like that. So you're right. This one, you can define where you're headed, but you're going to change where you're going. So you could have scope creep. It's not going to necessarily help with that. Organizing project work. Give me a green check mark if you think it addresses organizing project work, or a red no if you don't think so. That's pretty overwhelming. Yeah. So organizing project work, at a glance, you can tell where people are, what's happening, what the state is. All right. Assigning and keeping up with tasks and completion. What do you think? Give me a green check if you think it does. Oh, this one's very popular. Yes. Everyone has their own issues. You can see exactly where you are. You can see what's been assigned to you, whether it's for this sprint, next sprint coming up, and you can move it across. Task prioritization. Give me a green check if you think this addresses task prioritization. So mostly yes, one no. Yeah, mostly strongly yes. You do have to take the time, and this is the PI's work or the real owner's work, is dragging those cards so they're at the proper level. Because those cards are going to be taken off from the top. You're popping the stack. So you've got to organize that in order for that to work. You can also use tags, and we'll talk about that. So yes, I think we got this one. Hard to estimate task effort. I'm not even going to vote on this because the answer is we're not even going to try. Variability comes in from the process itself. If you want to think in terms of how much variance is being contributed, estimating task size wrong is about this much. Having to restart the entire project because you don't have enough signal in your data is this big. You know, so there's a lot more variance here. So why bother with this? You just don't. It doesn't help you estimate the task effort. Okay, centralized cohesive communication. What do you all think? Does this give you a way to communicate, and does this allow you to memorialize what you've done? Okay, generally yes. And we have one no. I would say this only works if people are actually using all the properties of GitHub. So if you're not in GitHub looking and seeing what's happening, browsing the issues and paying attention, it's not going to solve communication, which means if you have an executive that is not going to participate and they don't have a proxy to participate, there are other problems that this is not going to solve. Okay, so iterative nature of data science workflow. Does this allow for an iterative nature for project for data science workflow? Give me a green yes if you think this allows for that iterative nature. So generally yes, one no. I'm going to give this one to us. It allows you to account for it, but it doesn't tell you when to stop. That comes from outside. That's going to have to be a call that you make based on the value of what you have so far. And that is the danger. You can be caught in an infinite loop if you're not careful. High overhead for project management tools. So especially those folks who've tried Jira, tried other things, does this have less overhead than other project management tools? Give me a green yes. This has less overhead. Yeah. Ooh. I would have thought this one would have been a blowout because I spent about a year writing two different cards, one for GitHub and then one for, for the other tool that we're managing. I'll give this one here. I hope you'll come back next week because once this is part of the workflow, it actually doesn't add a whole lot at all. It just adds one additional view so long as you're already using Git and GitHub, a GitHub project. Communication between project stakeholders. Do you agree that, that this allows for communication between business and technical teams? Okay, I'm going to give this one to us. And then a final one, data versioning. I'm going to say no. That's a different tool. You really shouldn't be versioning data in Git or GitHub. It just doesn't work well. All right, so this kind of an approach has some value, but how do you actually do this? Can we cover how you actually do this using Git and GitHub and the best practices for writing issues and for doing GitHub project? We have about 2 minutes. No, of course not. No, we're not gonna be able to cover that. However, don't miss next week because next week we are actually going to be going over best practices and how do you write a good issue? How do you actually get team members involved? How do you, frankly, how do you gamify this? And so everyone is actually contributing and participating. How do you ease the entry of execs into participating with you? PIs, how do you use this to make it worth your while to actually participate and be part of this workflow? We're going to be talking about that next week. It's projects and GitHubs. If you haven't registered, please do. We would look forward to seeing you then. Let's go ahead and open this up for questions now. And I'm also perfectly happy to stick around a little bit past the 1 o'clock mark. You all have the ability to unmute yourself. So through chat or through unmuting yourself, go ahead and ask questions.
I'll ask the first dumb question. This is Ed Levine. So I know I've heard of GitHub. I've kind of searched around on it. What is GitHub and where do we find it in terms of the way you're describing this?
Absolutely. So GitHub is actually, it's a free tool. And as an educator, you can also get the premium version for free. And we'll talk about that next week, how to do that. But it's a tool primarily used, originally used primarily by coders, but then picked up by others as well. So it's a way to record all the work that you're doing around a project, but it's also a way to record information about the project, issues that you have. So you can think of it as a code versioning tool, but it is also at the same time a project management tool. And it's a project management part that most people don't know about and don't use. So we're going to be talking about that next week. It's actually pretty approachable, and you'll get some hands-on experience with it next week.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions?
Quick comment. I'm kind of an Agilista. Actually, I was iterative Lisp guy back from the old AI days before Agile came along, but I'm kind of into Agile. The role that was missing in traditional Agile is the role of the Scrum, of the product owner,
Yes.
as well as potentially the Scrum Master. But
Yes.
this requires everybody to cooperate seamlessly, and strangely enough, that doesn't always work. So sometimes you need somebody to run pseudo shotgun, either a part-time Scrum manager or,
Yes.
and more importantly, the product owner, because you need somebody that can go to the real stakeholders, the PI, can assimilate all their desires into some sort of meaningful statement that people doing the coding or the data prep or doing the UI for the user testing or whatever it is they're doing. When you do everything distributed, there are so many ways this can go wrong, no matter how good your Git tool is. And that's, I'm kind of looking for that role, even if it's a part-time role. It doesn't have to be full-time, but the buck has to stop somewhere.
That's right. So my take on that, I think you're absolutely right, especially in business, and the more difficult the task and the number of teams that you're touching increases, the more you need that role. What we found here is that the need for that role, that person can do less. So long as you're actually all together on the same platform and everyone is participating, now you don't need to have that Scrum Master always going to and saying, hey, I have a blocker here, and having to go up to executives or having to go over, or the product owner. Those roles are reduced a bit, but they don't completely go away. So we still need to have somebody who actually even just speaks to the board each week to doing that. So it doesn't make it go away, but it definitely helps to reduce the amount of work that person needs to do.
But you still have to have that role somewhere, and you have to define it, because if it's not defined, it doesn't exist.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And we'll be talking about that a bit next week. In some academic endeavors, you may not need to, but you're still going to have that lead graduate student or postdoc that is there to sort of keep things along. And in business, yeah.
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter. A grad student, a senior grad student is perfect. Just somebody to keep track of all the pieces and make sure nothing falls apart.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, I've got to run, but I'm looking forward to next week. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great questions. Other questions? Happy to stay past a little bit. All right. Thank you all very much. Hope to see you all next week.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.